There we go. Now we're on. We good to go on video? Awesome. Just double checking there. We got a few seconds, a few people milling in. We're back here in the back corner, so it seems that we're a little bit hidden. I get that a lot. Hotels put me down at the end of the hall, towards the emergency exit. I don't. Is it me? I don't know. All right, so it does look like it's time to start. We've got a few people filtering in, but that's not going to bother me. For everybody that is here, thank you and welcome to Houston Security Conference, HousSecCon. My name is Don C. Weber. I'm going to be talking about tactical risk reduction in ICS environments. Now, yes, it's a little bit different than the original talk title in the thing. It's ICS/OT. I've changed my vernacular a little bit. As the industry is changing, I'm changing my vernacular. Everybody's going to be changing their vernacular. Industrial control systems, ICS, usually the devices down at the process level. OT systems, I typically think about it as the IT within a control environment, so those Windows systems and the things that are supporting at the plant level. But then IACS, as I've come to understand it, is how the industry is starting to refer to all of the combination of everything, the people, the processes, the policies, the procedures, the technologies themselves, ICS, OT, people, management, and so forth. So yes, I'm going to talk about tactical risk reduction in IACS environments. Now, I do teach for SANS, you'll see that in a second. My boss wants me to kind of shift some of my vernacular. He comes up with way better titles than I do. So assessing adversary opportunities in critical infrastructure would probably be a better title for this talk. Once again, he's way better at it than I am. All right, so a little bit about myself. Okay, I've got two things going on. So it's, once again, my name's Don C. Weber. I run Cutaway Security. We do security. I've got a background in security. I've been doing this since the early 2000s. I went straight into security, so I'm one of those unique people. So I've never done IT admin. I've never done OT anything as far as deployment goes. But I do have a master's degree in information assurance. I've been doing security program maturity modeling and security assessments for the last 10 years within IACS, actually going on 13, I guess now. I also do penetration testing, security research. You're going to see some of the references that I have to some of my online projects that I just put out there for community involvement. Part of what I do and what I've been doing for the last 5 years, I'm a certified SANS instructor, so I teach the ICS 410 class, which is basically the security essentials class, just the introduction into OT environments, but also introduction for those OT people into security concepts, so I do that. Part of what I do, obviously, because I teach that class, I maintain that GICSP certification. And then this past year, I took it upon myself at the beginning of the year. I got a recommendation from one of the people that I respect in the industry. They're like, hey, you should go out and get your ISA IEC 62443 certification. And that's because it is industry specific, meaning that it is a framework that's developed towards control environments, towards the industrial sector. It is developed by those people that are actually implementers out in the field, so having a better understanding of what that is. Also, if I want to sell myself, as a person working within these environments, a lot of people, while the security side knows the GICSP, a lot of people from the industrial side don't necessarily understand, know that program, but they do understand 62443 and so forth. So I went out and I got that certification, and it changed my whole vernacular about how I'm actually presenting this information to my SANS students, how I'm talking to people when I'm giving talks, and also working with my clients as well. So I do think it's important. I encourage you to take a look at that because it is, it's going to help set a good foundation, even if you don't use that within your industry, because I do most of my stuff in the utility industry. They don't do a lot of 62443. But at the same time, I talk to people in all kinds of sectors. So it helps set that foundation so we have a common ground of how to refer to things, and then we can figure out how we're doing it in that sector. All right. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, we're here to, I'm changing it here, but I've got two different things. So we're going to talk about, after I got my certification, I started understanding 62443 a little bit better, and we're going to talk about what I understand from the risk assessment standpoint. In other words, we're going to set that foundation, and then I'm going to try to correlate between the difference between strategic and tactical risk assessments and vulnerability assessments. From there, I'll go through the methodology that I use. I mean, you can call it the cutaway security assessment methodology, but really it's just the methodology that is consistent with the industry around doing vulnerability assessments. We'll talk about that, and then we'll get into a summary with some of the other things, okay? Before we get started, please ask questions. I don't care if you stop me. You know, I will maintain a pace to get us all the way through. If I don't, we'll figure it out, okay? But as we're going, you can save it to the end if you want to, or you can just interrupt me. I will manage our time. Okay, so now 62443. All right, 62443 risk assessments are, and actually I'll put this up, Dee Dee. I'll put this up so you can get the, you'll be able to get the slides. I'll put a PDF out there if you want. Yeah, so I'll make sure that you have a reference to it, okay? So, a 62443 risk assessment. 62443 is the series of standards that helps to guide a security program within an organization. So if your company does not have a security program for your OT side, for your plant side, if you need to come up with a new one, you can follow the 62443 model. There are other models out there, yes. You know, some organizations already have it implemented. This is a good way to see how mature your program is. Go look at everything that's laid out by the 62443 security program, see how it correlates. What they do is they spend a lot of time in there talking about risk assessments. How do we rate risk? How are we going to gather information so that we can make the proper determinations around risk within our environment, so that we can select the proper people, so that we can select the proper equipment, countermeasures to help us with that, okay? What I used to think that I was doing when I was doing vulnerability assessments and penetration tests and so forth, I thought I was, I was telling people about their risks. And then I realized that I'm not telling people about their risks. I'm telling people about the vulnerabilities in their implementation, okay? So you have vulnerabilities in products, but then you have vulnerabilities in the deployment. Because you've selected certain products, you're going to have natural vulnerabilities. How that affects your process, how that affects the implementation, that information, get some security professionals to help you understand that, talk to your OT teams, push that up to leadership so they can do the vulnerability assessment. And that's what I learned when I was taking the 62443 certification. And what I have here, this is a picture taken from the documentation. It's not the full picture, but you can kind of see this here. This is the risk assessment process. And what I've highlighted here is that the vulnerability, the security assessments, the penetration tests, whatever you want to call it, okay, it's only a small subset of it. In other words, you have gathering information, so you're going to identify threats, you're going to identify, determine consequences, figure out vulnerabilities from the implementation. You're going to get all of that, you're going to get a final report, and then that's going to feed into your detailed risk assessment process. This is the 62443 way of doing it, okay? And I think it's great. Now I understand how I'm feeding back into the process, back into the information for leadership to make that decision so that they can get the key performance indicators, their KPIs, all right? PKIs. All right. So the 62443 risk assessment process, when you go through and you look at that, what they do is they have 7 foundational requirements, all right? And you can read those. I'm not going to read them. You can, if you can see them, it's an eye chart, yes. It's an eye chart on purpose, okay? The foundational requirements are all of the different things that you should be considering to determine how the risk within your environment and how you want to address that risk, all right? Their recommendation is that you use some type of model to understand your maturity, okay? In this case, they outline their security levels. You can read each one of the security levels. You know, it goes from security level 0, which you're not doing anything, okay, to you've got some information that's protected a little bit. We've talked about it, so that's security level 1, so on. And then the ultimate protection, you're protected against intentional, unauthenticated access by entities using sophisticated means. All right? If you're protected from that, you're security level 4. And now you can go through and you can map that. So we have an SLA, which is your your actual security level that you're at, and then you'll have your SLT, which is your target level. And now your leadership can go through and say, okay, where do we want to devote resources and money and time, okay, and tell people that we need to get better at this, okay? And that's great from a systemic standpoint, from an organization standpoint. But when we're talking about actual change at the process level, what are we supposed to do right now to protect right now? That's a different conversation, okay? Because when we start talking to our engineers and the operators, you know, when we start saying, hey, we need to do security assessments of your processes, we need you to have these, we're sending you security professionals, or there's a new security team within our organization, and they need information from your process, they're going to have a lot of questions, you know. How are they going to gather that information? You know, what is a pen test? You know, they're going to come in and change things within our environment, you know. I mean, ultimately, we get down to, fine, why don't you just tell me what to do? And I've actually been out to sites. I've been to, you know, substations. I've been to compressor stations. I've been to different plants, and they're like, look, you know, if they're not telling me, hey, why don't you just go away and let me do my job, they're asking me, fine, just tell me what you want me to do, okay? And that's what I try to gear some of my assessments for. Actually, when I go in and do a security assessments, penetration tests within an organization, I'm talking with those people to help them understand why I'm doing things and making them comfortable with me being there and gathering that information, but also telling them why things are important. I'm looking at this because of A, B, C, and D, okay? So these questions still remain. And that's when I started, so I think about this, and yes, I'm military, so I do think in strategic, tactical, I think in those terms, okay, many of you might not understand it. Strategic decisions are designed to modify that culture, to address systemic issues within an organization, okay? Tactical decisions make a change right there, okay? And that, I think, is important, because what we want to do is we want to, if we're trying to keep people out right now, identify risk right now that we need to protect safety, to protect reliability and availability, our immediate updates need to be tactical in nature. Our leadership, they need the information so they can make, oh, I'm sorry. I got two things going here, I apologize, this is my fault, okay? So strategic and tactical, all right? The leadership needs that, the decision-making information, actionable intelligence, what I like to call it, so they can make that, address those culture and systemic issues. But our operators, our engineers, they need the tactical information right now. Like, what do I need to change right now? How do I need to change our, what we do on a daily basis, our authentication, how we're accessing things and so forth. We need to know that right now, and then we can make better decisions for our countermeasures and our updated procedures later, okay? So, in order to do this, we have to have a come to realization. If you're an information security professional, you understand this slide already, meaning that you understand potentially, hopefully, the different types of vulnerability assessments there are. Okay? If you're talking about people that are coming from the OT environment, process engineers, operators, even the IT teams that help them for their OT implementations, they might not understand that. It's not their job to understand this. However, from a security perspective, this is what we're going to use to gather our information. You can see we've got different types in there. So vendor review is just gathering information about your vendor and your integrator. You know, what are they doing? How are they implementing things? Security research, or when you give people products and they start looking at for the vulnerabilities, and they're publishing some of those vulnerabilities, they're looking at the vendor's products. Hopefully your vendors are putting that information out there as well, but wouldn't you like to know if there's a vulnerability in that product before you select it, okay? And sometimes we have that option, sometimes we don't. We have to realize that, okay, but that's just a part of it. Threat modeling. Threat modeling is just looking at all of the things that we have and then just developing use cases around that to understand it so that we can address the ones we want to address and not worry about the other ones, okay? Those, as you can see from an OT risk standpoint, I haven't talked about touching your OT network. I haven't talked about touching your process or anything like that. I'm just gathering information, and that's extremely important. Everything else below that, there is some risk around it, meaning that you do have to grab actionable intelligence through some type of active means within that environment, and that's why it gets a little bit more risky. And that's where we get into the security assessment, security program maturity. I do that because you have a security program typically in your environment, but is it implemented correctly? What are the gaps? So that's what I talk about maturity. And then getting into the penetration testing and red teaming, where you're actively exploiting vulnerabilities. Okay, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but penetration testing and red team is actively exploiting vulnerabilities. That's why they're that high risk, that's why there's the high cost. Now, when we think about it from a 62443 perspective, okay, and we're thinking about that risk assessment, all right, that initial information, the project data, like who are the stakeholders, gathering information about a specific project, okay, plus our vendor reviews and our security research, all that vulnerability information, that's the 62443 high-level risk assessment, okay? What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to correlate some of the things that we naturally do within the security industry, the way that the security professionals talk about it, to the way that 62443 is trying to educate their personnel, the people that are certified in that, so you can understand the correlation. So it's all in there. What we normally do is a part of this process, we're just using slightly different terms for that series of standards. So challenges. So one of the challenges, thank you. So one of the challenges that we have when considering the high-level risk assessment, and I give the perfect example is the cloud. We're getting so many vendors and integrators that's saying, hey, let's move this stuff to the cloud. You don't want somebody, you don't want to give somebody credentials and multi-factor authentication into your control environment. Hey, you know what? We've got this cloud appliance now. We don't need credentials from you. We'll just deploy this in your control network. It'll connect out to the cloud. You just create a tunnel through your DMZ, and now we don't have to authenticate. We can do everything that we need. Sounds good. I mean, actually, they're reducing risk because they don't have accounts, multi-factor authentication. You don't have to, they're managing all of that authentication and authorization. But what does that really mean? So what I did, actually, I should start this with a question. Is the OT side, are your process engineers and your operators, are they cloud experts? No. Do they even understand what the cloud is? Well, they do from the mobile app standpoint. I'm sorry, Chris, what was that? Shaking your head, no. So, but is it their job? Is the cloud their job? It's not. The process is their job. So what we need to do, and what I'm finding, and some of the systemic issue throughout the industry is that the OT side, they want to keep everything tight because people don't understand the process, but they want all these new technologies that they don't understand, they're not educated in, okay? Well, guess what? You need to bring in people, the IT side, the cloud, your cloud experts, bring them in to help with the implementation of these products and these solutions, okay? Because they are the experts. They understand the pitfalls, around, hey, it's great to push data up to the cloud, but what if I need that data back? How much is that going to cost you? A lot more, right? And you don't understand all of those hidden costs, not to mention the hidden security risk around that. So I started a project, the CutSec Cloud Sec ICS, and all this is a PDF document. Okay, it's just a PDF document that it helps you perform that high-level risk assessment associated with 62443. Okay, so identify your stakeholders, identify your vendors, ask your vendors for specific information associated with some of the cloud assets. What are the countermeasures that they're putting into your DMZ? Okay, are you going to have vision into that or are you not? So now you can make a risk assessment associated with this communications. I'm not saying use this. What I'm saying is that your team should be talking about this. You can use this as a starting point if you like, but you should be definitely doing this if you're not. So yeah, I put that out there. If you find this useful, it's out on GitHub, please give me an issue. Like, give me some updates on how I can improve that process, starting point for everybody. All right. Dang it. Okay, so cyber vulnerability assessment prioritization. All right. There is a way to gather information, and everybody has a slightly different methodology on how they do it. Okay, when I started thinking about this and I started, I'll admit it, I made this up on my own. I was taking what I was doing before and thinking about how to do this safely in control environments. Nobody was telling me how to do this, so I had to come up with a process myself. And so I came up with the tactical ICS security. okay? And what this is this is my approach, this is my methodology for information gathering. I look at physical security, identify what you're doing for segmentation and isolation, access control, so on and so forth, okay? You can tie each one of these to all of those foundational requirements that are in the 62443. So I didn't change my methodology of how my approach was, I just know how to refer back to it a little bit better. So if you go to do a security assessment and you're looking at this, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in just a second, okay? This is going to be my approach. The number one way to protect your control environments is to keep people away from it, which means physical security and then segmentation and isolation. How are you keeping people out of that, okay? So, this is my way of understanding that so we can make some of those tactical decisions to get quick change and then push that actionable intelligence up to the leadership, all right? So here's my process, all right? Vulnerability assessments. We do remote scoping. Okay, so if I have a client and they're like, hey, Don, we want to do this security assessment. All right, so what's our scope? So we identify the scope. We look at the architecture. We start doing, and I've changed it from threat modeling. I've changed my vernacular from threat modeling to adversary opportunity models, which means that we need to look at that architecture, look at the potentials for attack vectors, and see how the threat actors are going to attempt to or plan their attacks on your environments. In other words, coming up with some use cases that we want to test, and then come up with a test plan. So we're going to do that. So that's the remote scoping, and then we do all of the on-site stuff. When I started thinking about the 62443 stuff, I realized that, hey, you know what? That initial scoping, that's a part of their methodology. You have to scope this. You have to know what you're doing an assessment on. When we do penetration testing and security assessments in our corporate environments, a lot of times we don't have any reins, right? We just let them go. They're just like, hey, go find something. Go find bad. Where can you do bad things? Well, that's not how we do it in control environments. In control environments, you have to have very specific scope so that you can have tight controls over what you're looking at and what you're going to be interacting with. Okay, so scoping is extremely important. The reason why I updated this mentality, or this mentality for my methodology, was because of two electrical utilities. When I went to do the scoping for them, they said, hey, this is what you're going to do. This is how our team does it. And I was like, hey, you know how effective this is? It's awesome. And so I just started doing it. All right, we're going to talk about the rest of it, all right? So when we're thinking about the 62443 vulnerability assessments, okay, they break it down very specifically into scoping, active and passive. So taking my initial methodology, I started thinking about it. I mean, the high-level risk assessment that we're talking about, all right, that is the scoping, as I mentioned, okay? But then we have to start gathering more information. We're going to have to get on-site. We're going to have to start doing interviews. I always, when I'm doing a security assessment, this isn't like your security assessments in your corporate environments. You can't do a Dropbox. You can't VPN in. I mean, you could, but I don't want to, and I usually pass those up when people ask me to do that. I pass on that. The risk is too high. And even if we can make the risk tolerable, I'm not talking to people. I'm not seeing them. I'm not seeing the actual implementation and deployment because everyone's unique, okay? So I do that site walkthrough. I look at physical security. I check that first. We get a walkthrough of the process, which allows me to interact with the people. Hey, what do you actually do? What are you actually concerned about? Start asking those questions, okay? So I have the interviews with the different organizations. All of that is our passive vulnerability assessment. Passive vulnerability assessment, just gathering information around that, okay, and documenting it. I actually could stop a lot of security assessments at this point and point out some vulnerabilities that would make tactical risk reduction within your environment. I can usually do that, but we want to do as much as we can during these efforts, okay? So we want to gather additional information, and what we're going to do is we are going to do some active information gathering, some, capturing some network traffic, doing some enumeration of the attack surface, meaning looking at the services that are exposed to your networks, both on your servers, but also down at the process level if that's within the scope, okay? And then we're taking all of that information and doing asset management. Now, one of the key things I like to point out, if you're not familiar with these types of assessments within control environments, when we think about doing that network capture within our corporate environments, okay, that's typically pretty easy. In other words, you have a network team that already has the feeds to get that network traffic configured, so you can get a span port or a mirror port pretty easily. It's easy to change those the settings of those network devices. You might be able to quickly put a tap in place, a physical tap, to gather that information because TCP is awesome, right? And it just makes the reconnection. However, when you're talking about doing that within the control environment, that is an active thing because you're actively changing the configuration of those network devices. You unplug a network cable, you might cause a delay in some of the communications and cause a shutdown of pieces of equipment within these environments. So you have to change your mentality if you're doing these assessments or you're planning for these. If you're going to be capturing network traffic, that is an active change that you have to make sure that you have the proper change management and change control and you're following that properly. And then finally, reporting. And all of this is in the 62443. Reporting is the most important part because we have to get that information to the people that are doing the risk assessment, okay? First of all, it helps to explain what the findings were and some of the recommendations so we can make the tactical changes. And then that's going to feed back into the actual risk assessment that is a part of the organization's security program, okay? Did I say penetration testing in any of that? I didn't. Did I say active exploitation? Is there active exploitation in this list right here? There is not, okay? It doesn't mean you can't do it, but you better have a testing environment and a really mature team of stakeholders to do it. Because I guarantee you those test environments aren't cheap either. And if I brick a device in those test environments, what's going to happen? Well, yeah, they got to bring people out, okay, and replace that equipment potentially, or at least take a bunch of steps. So even in the test environments, you might not do active exploitation. But do we have enough information here where we can make some intelligent decisions? Absolutely, all right? So we need to be careful with the term penetration testing. We need to be careful with that term penetration testing, okay? Because everybody's asking for it. You have to get a pen test on this. Do you? You need to get a security assessment, that's for sure, okay? So we need to be careful with that vernacular, but we're coming up with a new class for SANS, the SANS 613, which is going to be security assessments and penetration testing of control environments, okay? We cannot not put the penetration testing in there, or nobody would come to the class, all right? But we're going to teach them how to do pen testing in control environments, and you've already heard part of my spiel. All right, so reports. Even reports are different. Reports are different. On the left-hand side in that slide, this is a typical report that you would expect to see during a security assessment, penetration test, red team within your corporate environment. Executive summary, what was my scope so you know what we were looking at, a detailed methodology, what did you actually do, what did you run, what was the information that you saw, okay? And then eventually you get to some findings, what were the observations that are risk or vulnerability, what do you think that risk is, and then some recommendations around that, summarization and so forth. Okay, that's great. That takes a lot of time. Actually, it's a really skill to do this in line when you're doing the assessment. Okay, it's a huge skill to reduce some of the time around reporting for that. Well, it doesn't really work in our environments because in our environments, we want that information right now. What do you want me to do right now? And I learned this from those same two utilities. They're like, Don, we're right there with you. We're walking through this. We don't need that methodology write-up. I watched you do it. And actually, in some locations, most of my actions are projected onto a wall. They're watching me keystroke by keystroke, okay? And that's just because of the regulations and requirements, okay? So what they want is they want a different report. They want it, first of all, they want an activity log. What did you actually do on my systems, okay? And it's not a log, they want to keep track of what I did, but they're not trying to justify any of my work, kind of like the methodology did. What they want to know is, did you make a change to a system? Did you add a user account? Okay? because they expect that that's a part of the process as a part of the security assessment and / penetration test. Or did I run a tool that created an entry in a database, or did I create a new file on the operating system? All they want to know is, did that happen? And were you able to clean it up? Because what they want to do is, if I couldn't clean it up because I lost permissions or I just didn't have that access, they're going to have somebody else go clean it up because they don't want it there. They want the system looking pristine. So the activity log helps them understand what I did so that we can look back and talk about it intelligently. But also, was there any changes to that environment, whether it's testing or whether it's production? And then finally, they want our findings and our observations. Okay, what did you actually, what is the vulnerability? Write it up. Talk about not only risk, but notice that I've added consequences in there. What is the consequence of what you just did? Okay, are you affecting monitoring? Are you affecting control? Are you affecting production or safety? Okay, and those are words that I use and I put into my findings write-ups. Okay, and then finally, what are our recommendations? And our recommendations have to be in line with the process. Okay, it's not that, hey, you need to patch everything. Your recommendations should be associated with architecture and with workarounds and with the environment that is available there. So probably the biggest challenge, one of the things I was hoping to get out of doing the 62443 certification was I wanted to know how to score risk appropriately. Okay, I wanted, when we talk about scoring vulnerabilities and scoring risk within for any type of assessment, when we're thinking about it from a corporate standpoint, we've got a specific way of doing it. And most of the time when you look at that, it's associated with what is the impact on business? How much downtime is there? How much are we losing monetarily? That's a part of it. Was any, the big thing was confidentiality. Is there any PII exposed, or is there any credit card information exposed? Okay, well, we talk about it differently. We talk about it differently within our control environments. Okay, we talk about how to rate this risk slightly differently. And actually, you can see this. If you go out to, if you're familiar with the MITRE attack matrix, if you go out and look at the MITRE attack matrix, you'll see that they now have enterprise and ICS and mobile on there. Okay, the biggest difference is all the way to the right. Look all the way to the right and you'll see impacts. And then, you should do this. You should go out and look at the attack matrix, look at the enterprise one, see all of the impacts that they list for a corporate environment. Then look at the impacts associated with control environments. And those impacts are related to loss and denial of monitoring, loss of control, loss of safety. Okay, so the consequences they're actually consequences rather than impacts. All right? So when I'm thinking about this, when I was going through the 62443, I was like, hey, they're going to show me how to rate this risk better. How do the industry expects to rate this risk? And when I got to the section about it, they're like, you should use how you normally rate risk associated with your own program. Here's a recommendation on how to do it. People refer to, and they point you to all the documentation out of the NIST 800-30. They talk about, are we going to get breached in 6 months, a year, 10 years? How often is this going to happen? And it was because the industry hasn't come up with a good model to rate that risk. That doesn't help me when I'm doing security assessments right now, when I'm trying to express information about vulnerabilities. So a lot of what my utilities do is, first of all, one utility uses the NIST 800-30, okay? And the other one uses the OWASP model. So if you look at the OWASP risk rating model, you can go out and look at it online. It's an open source project. There's actually a calculator that you can go and do it. But remember, they are all associating that risk with business consequences and not OT consequences. So it's like, fine. I don't have that information. Nobody's doing this. Nobody's pushing this forward. Everybody I'm talking to is, fine, I'll do it. So what I've done is I've gone out, and you can go find this online, the Cutaway Security, ICS, and I named it horribly at first, so we've changed it, because I actually had risk in there, and I've changed it to this name, System Testing and Assessment Rating Methodology, so ICS STAR. And I followed the model for the OWASP calculator, so it has a calculator out there. And basically what it is I took all the business stuff out of there, and I'm implement, or I changed it to OT side. So vernacular around safety, so safety concerns, safety impacts, technical impacts from a process level, and I changed all the vernacular for all of these scoring, okay? Not because it's, you know, set in stone, but so that people that are doing it from assessing risk from the OT side, the stakeholders that are doing that are your process engineers, potentially operators, some of your OT admins, okay? They can look at some of the vernacular that I've used and like, okay, how am I gonna rate this risk? Do we have multi-factor authentication to get to this point to exploit this vulnerability? Yes, we do. Okay, so it's gonna be a lower risk. There's no multi-factor authentication. They just log in and they're on the HMI. Okay, that's gonna be a higher risk. So I've modified the vernacular a little bit. This is another project that I'm hoping that people will go and look at and give me feedback on. I just started a discussion forum on the GitHub repository for it. So I'm hoping the industry will help me fix this. I did this from a security side. You don't like it, OT? Change it. Help me change it, right? So that's out there, and then I hope you do. And this is what I'm gonna try to start using, but I have to get the agreement with the stakeholders, so I'm gonna have to sell this to every stakeholder that I go into. All right, so bringing it back around, this whole thing, the industry looks to 62443 to help them understand their programs. And I'm not taking, once again, I'll say it again, not every industrial sector is using 62443. Not every country is using this, okay? But it's a great way to start the conversation. And if you're gonna be if they're gonna be evaluating what they do, one of the things they're gonna look to is 62443. They're gonna be looking at the foundational requirements, the security levels, they're gonna be talking about all of that. And I just wanna remind everybody that that is strategic, okay? That is long-term. You want to address risk, you want to figure out the direction you want to do to reduce risk and, and make sure it's cost effective down the line. This is going to be strategic. But if you want to change things right now, reduce risk, improve safety, reliability, and availability right now, you're going to be thinking about it from a tactical nature. And that's my recommendation, that you have those approaches. You can't do tactical without strategic. You can't. They do help each other, but you should be thinking about that. There is a difference. You can, if you gather all of this information and you don't do anything and you wait to make all your strategic decisions, guess what? Somebody's hacking into you right now, okay? It takes time to do the strategic stuff, so have a plan for both. That's all I'm really saying, okay? How can we do that? Well, why don't we distribute some of the risk assessments that we do? Or the vulnerability assessments, okay? Now, am I reducing the amount of work that I can do? Absolutely. If you start doing this, I'm gonna have less things to do. Actually, I'm not. What you're gonna do is you're gonna make things harder for me and you're gonna make it more interesting for me. So I want you to do this, all right? And what I'm saying about distribute your vulnerability assessments, if I do an assessment for your company, why don't you have somebody look at this, look at that assessment, take out the things that are sensitive for that specific environment and give it to the rest of your teams. Why am I making these same observations around physical security vulnerabilities and access, incorrectly implemented access, default passwords and so forth? Why don't you just say, hey, leaders from all the teams, here's a security assessment of this area over here. Does any of this apply to you? That doesn't apply to me. That doesn't apply. Oh, that applies to me. Yeah, we better go check that out. All right? Tactical risk reduction. Don't wait for me to do an assessment in that area, right? So plan that out a little bit better. We could do this from an industry perspective. We could do this using the ISACs, the munis, and the co-ops. Okay? Is this hard? Is it difficult? Absolutely. But what do the ISACs already do for us? They already take information from organizations that are being attacked, they anonymize it, they put the indicators of compromise out there, and they share that with that group. Why not do this from a vulnerability perspective? Hey, we detected these things. Does it have to be anonymized? Is this, is it work? Yes, it's work. Okay, but why are we doing the same security assessments and finding the same vulnerabilities over and over and over again? It's not cost effective, okay? So industry should be looking at how to do this, and I know that there are some people that there are some of those teams that are doing it, but at the same time, if you have a company, why aren't you doing this internally? Why aren't you sharing? Why are you waiting for your systemic issues to be addressed through your strategic planning? Why not get that tactical information to people so you can get that quick risk reduction, okay? And you only have to pay for it once. That's my recommendation. Make it more interesting for me. All right. So here's our summary. You can read through the summary stuff. I've already talked about all of this stuff. You know, you got to be familiar with the risk assessment process. There is a difference between our corporate environments and how we're going to do security assessments and within our control environments. You should have a plan around that. Gathering that, following a proper process, knowing how to do it properly is important. You're getting a huge influx of information security and IT professionals into this environment, and I think it's a great thing, but they have to be educated around this. We have to be talking to them about what their scopes are and what their limitations are, okay, so that they can have a good impact within these environments, and then distribute your reports. Okay, so that's all I have. All right, we've still got about 5 minutes, right? Okay, so please, this is your opportunity to ask any questions, make any points, get on your soapbox. Chris? No? So any questions? Yes, ma'am. Oh, yeah, so if you don't mind.
Thank you, Don. I'm Dee Dee. I'm sure some people have heard me talking earlier, former CISO of oil and gas companies. And I just wanted to add on your last point, the summary, in terms of sharing the free vulnerability assessment, which is very, very crucial. The challenge we all are facing, because I'm a former owners and operators in that space, is that there's no incentive to do it. We see each other as competitors, and so the government does not provide any incentive for us to actually help each other. So I wanted to point that out, how important that is. My partner in crime is not here, Mario Chalk. When we both were at, one is the red company, oil and gas, the other one is blue oil and gas company, I'm not naming names, we would go underground to exchange IOCs. Because if we went up through the legal system, even though this is my lawyer here, it was not her. It would have taken years to get to that sharing. I wanted to point that out, since this is, you know, information sharing, just it's okay. And then, but we need also for the government to come up with an incentive program. Thank you.
That's good. Yeah, and thank you very much. No, I mean, every sector is going to be slightly different, you know, and you know, I'm not saying that that's easy. Okay, it is hard from a sector standpoint. If you're trying to address this in a sector, whether it's DoD or whether it's you know. Usually I reference the ISAC level at that, water, electrical, so on and so forth. Okay, so yes, that is difficult, that's hard, but that's what those bodies are set up for, and perhaps there should be some programs for DoD. But a company, small company, large company that is doing this, why are you paying for this over and over and over again just to get the same data? So it should be easier within a company, more difficult when you're sharing between companies. I agree. So I appreciate the comment. Chris.
How does your technical vulnerability assessment, not the old, what you used to call threat model, how does it deal with non-malicious threats, like mistakes, someone didn't make a backup before, it still causes the same impact, and it's still kind of cyber related. How does that program that you have or your methodology deal with non-malicious threats?
So thanks for the question, Chris. I would say that it's two different things. It's two different things. I'm doing a security, when I'm coming in to do security assessments, that's my scope. I'm specifically looking at the environments and gathering that information. What I think you're talking about is going to the maturity, is going back to the mature implementation, a security program maturity model. I'm gathering information to feed into some of that, okay? Whereas some of the things that you're talking about from an operation standpoint and risks that are inherent to how we're doing things from a technical standpoint, okay, which are things that we need to understand because it's a part of that security attack surface is some of those things that those assets, backups, and implementation and so forth, and that discussion needs to be had. But when I'm talking about going into an organization, whether it's your own team or coming in from an outside entity and doing a security assessment within a specific scope, I'm talking about the security implementations, unless the scope has a broader model. So my adversary opportunity model, which is why I changed, why I think I need to change the name, right? And my vernacular around it, because it's not associated with the information that you're talking about there. It's talking about how are threat actors going to do something, okay? Not necessarily deployment risks. Does that answer your question, Chris? Differentiate, yes, sir. Okay. Questions? Anybody else? Yes, sir. Hang on. We got to do the microphone for everybody.
So hello, Oren Niskin, sorry. I have a quick question. I really like the way the STAR methodology kind of standardizes the way we talk about risks and assessing risks in ICS or IACS. I was wondering how that, if you've seen value communicating that to vendors, like OEM vendors.
So the ICS STAR is, literally just like last month. Just came out last month. I've been working with some of the people that Chris and I work with on a regular basis. I've been conversing with some of the people in the industry. I have not had a chance, so it's out there. I'm starting to talk about it. We're going to integrate it. It's one of the things I'm going to be using for the new SANS class. But I'm really looking at industry input and hopefully it'll get out there. There's a lot of updates. Really, in my mind, the project just needed to get started so people can start doing input. What I expect is that people aren't going to use that. They're going to start coming up with their own, whether it's a vendor, integrator, or it's going to force ISA, IEC 62443. It's going to force their team to come up with their own. You don't want me doing it? Fine. Somebody better do it, right? So we got to talk because we have to be able to rate it a little bit better. So it's brand new. We're just starting the discussions. Does that answer your question? Excellent. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
How do you perform the scoping for the systems or processes you're risk assessing? Do you go specific PLCs versus like a product?
So the question, how do we do the scoping? I look at the stakeholders. What do you want me to look at? What do you want me to assess? And then we start looking, and then what happens is we have a kickoff meeting, or like a project kickoff meeting, and say, here's what we have, here's the process that has been outlined, and we get an agreement of where we're going for all of that. So you've got some more input.
It's more for the less mature companies who don't know anything about cybersecurity and bring in their cybersecurity program into reality, and they don't know what to risk assess.
So in the cases where I'm helping them actually outline what what that scope is, and I think that's important, is we need to, my approach would be a particular, and whatever sector, how they're calling it, process, line, cell, whatever, pick one spot, pick a small spot, and just do that quick assessment of what they're doing within that area. When I'm doing a particular process line cell, okay, it is at the process level. So it's level 2 and 0, 1, and 2. It's that process area, okay? And I do kind of understand why the 62443 talked about zones and conduits. I understand that a lot better. I don't necessarily use that because I'm an IT information security background, okay? But I understand. So I would look at the different zones and the conduits for the communications up to level 3. And so if we're actually looking at the process, I would pick the process and how it's communicating in the assets to the level 3 part of the environment, to the plant part, how are they pushing information to the SCADA and stuff like that. I don't want to assess the SCADA. right? I don't want to assess that control center or wherever it's going up into that HMI. I don't want to assess those systems. I want to concentrate on the process level. Or if I wanted to concentrate that, I would select those and how they're communicating down. But I would separate those two, especially initially, just so that we have a subset, we have a manageable set of technologies and communication protocols and so forth, because it's super complex. It can be, and every player that you go can be a different implementation of it. So I try to keep them as small as possible, but by giving them enough risk or enough information so that, oh yeah, we're doing that over here, 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 we can technically get actionable intelligence for all of our environments from the one. So does that help? Okay. I don't think there's time. I'm here with the ICS Village, so I'm at the villages in the corner, so I'll be in and out of there. So if you do have any additional questions, I'm more than happy to answer them over there. Feel free, or we can, I'll hang out in the hall in just for a minute if there are any additional questions. But Daniel, I think is that it, or is there another person coming up? Okay, so the next session is here and it's 1 o'clock. Thank you very much, everybody, for your attention.